A vacation house in Quincy, California belongs to my parents. The 2-acre property has woods all around it. When my siblings and I were little, our family would frequently visit that location. We no longer truly have matching schedules to go together as a family because we are all grown-ups. But I did tell Rose about our vacation house when we were just getting to know each other. When we went on our 5th date in October, Quincy's breathtaking natural beauty was enhanced by the changing leaves. When I suggested that we spend a weekend there together, she immediately answered, "Let's do it." 2 days later, we were preparing for the road journey to Quincy by packing our belongings. We left after I picked her up from her home. The drive took over 5 hours. We spent the time talking about everything in life, including TV series, families, and childhood experiences. Afterwards, we would listen to podcasts and comedians to kill time. I wanted to show her how lovely Quincy was, so we drove through the quaint small village first when we eventually arrived. After arriving at the house 10 minutes later, we noticed a small wooden fence at the driveway, which we keep closed. There is no lock on the place, thus it is always unoccupied. I stepped out of the car to open it, and then we drove past it onto the property. It's just a small deterrent to keep people from entering the property while we're there. Every few weeks from the summer into the fall, my dad hires landscapers to come work on his property. Rose was impressed by how well kept the property was when we visited, and because we arrived right before lunch, we unpacked. After giving her a tour, I switched on the hot tub to ensure the water was hot enough. When we were done, we headed into town to eat at one of my favorite restaurants. In addition to visiting the Plumas County Museum, we did some sightseeing. We then made our way back to the house because it was getting dark outside. The hot tub was beneath the awning on the back terrace, where we spent some time unwinding. Even though it was terribly chilly outside, the hot tub felt good until we both heard what sounded like footsteps, crushing leaves close by. We both leaped out of the hot tub and fled inside the house because we believed it was a bear. I turned out all the lights, both inside and outdoors, in case a bear or other wild animal was drawn to them. Instead of seeing a bear as I looked out one of the windows, I saw the shadow of a person strolling along the side of the house. I dashed to the rear door and closed the window blind to lock it. "Rose should be quiet," I said. There was a moment of silence as the footsteps circled the house until they reached the front door. Someone shouted, "It's the police," as there was a knock on the door. We couldn't figure it out. I went to the front and said, "Is there a problem?" Through the closed door, we received a call about breaking and entering. The person on the other end said, "How is that possible?" I wondered. "It is not a quarter of a mile to the closest neighbor." There was an obvious, "I just need you to open the door, sir," he replied. I answered, "I apologize, but I don't feel confident doing it." My next thought was to glance out the window to check if there was a police car parked in front. I managed to see outside by slightly bending the blind towards the front. Twilight was falling outside, but there was still enough light to see the property and that there were no police cars in the area. "I don't think that's a real cop," I said. Rose. I said through the door that I didn't see a police car out there when the man outside knocked on the door once more. "I don't feel secure enough to answer the door." The man said nothing in response to this. We assumed he had left when there was another pause in conversation, but a few minutes later, we were still conversing in the living room. Next, heaving footsteps echoed away from the entrance. Despite our awareness, he had stayed still in that spot the entire time. I turned to look out the window once more, but I saw no one. The terrifying realization that the house was surrounded by woods made him leave in a different direction. It seemed like he could approach from any direction, so we decided not to go outside again. Apart from me stepping outside quickly that evening to turn off the hot tub's bubbles, nothing happened. After watching movies in the bedroom, we finally fell asleep. I kept the shotgun my dad had hidden under the bed in the closet. We hiked in Pluma National Forest the following day. After that, we went out to dinner and then to the neighboring cinema to catch a movie. As we arrived back at the house, it was beginning to grow dark. Rose cried out, Oh my God. And I almost veered the car, fearing that I would strike something, when she pointed to someone hastily leaving the home and heading into the woods till they vanished into the night. I slammed on the brakes and said what she had indicated. When Rose began to panic that someone was following us, I made an effort to calm her down. "We have a rifle," I assured her, "and we're heading out early tomorrow morning." I admit that I was a little afraid, too, so I parked as close to the house as I could. And we hurried inside. I quickly walked through the house, making sure that all of the windows and doors were closed. That evening, we stayed inside and packed our belongings so we could get ready in the morning. We watched a movie in the bedroom before turning in for the night. I began to notice an odd scratching sound coming from outdoors about that time. Every few seconds, it would occur and then pause for a short while. I was unable to discern the nature of it, but something was happening outside. I waited until the noises fully stopped before stealthily getting out of bed out of fear that the person could have returned. Rose, I approached the window, slightly twisted the blinds, and discovered that a man was trying to peer in from the other side. Without a doubt, he spotted me. I cried out as I tumbled backward. Christ Jesus, Rose became conscious. That being said, I remained silent. Screaming like a lunatic, I ran out the back door and blasted the shotgun into the air, hoping to scare that man and anyone else who might have been out there. I took the shotgun from under the bed and made sure it was loaded. Before returning inside, I believe I shot 3 shells into the air. Then, in a weird manner, I told Rose what had transpired. Going outside and doing that gave me a good surge of adrenaline, which may have contributed to my sense of confidence that whatever was outside wasn't going to return. After the excitement slowly wore off, I was terrified of hearing any noises coming from outside when we got back into bed. We managed to get through the night, and I did call the police the next morning to simply file a complaint about the entire incident. Thankfully, the guy never returned, at least not while my family and I were there. Music. My family and I have been back there a few times since the story. I was traveling through Colorado at night when I noticed this. By the time I got to Tabernash, it had to be close to 1 in the morning. I made a stop at a petrol station to pick up some fuel and grab a bite. I immediately returned to driving after that, even though it was now late and there weren't any cars on the roads I was traveling on. It was late, I was sleepy, and you never know where a cop might be hidden, so I still drove inside the speed limit. I was traveling at about 50 miles per hour on this narrow route when the feared flashing of lights materialized in my rearview mirror. I noticed the car with the flashing red and white lights behind me when I glanced in my mirror. I checked my speed and was only driving an extra 2 miles per hour over the speed limit when I finally pulled over. Along with the car behind me, I slid to the side of the road. Being a cautious and diligent driver, I had never been pulled over before, so I was rather irritated. As soon as the police approached my car, I had the impression that I was being pulled over illegally. He greeted me as I dropped the window and asked to see my license and registration. I tried to act as though I knew my rights and wasn't just going to do anything for him. When I asked him why he had pulled me over, he replied that he will address it in a moment. I assured him that none of my taillights were out and that I wasn't speeding or swerving. He wasn't wearing a black uniform with a black vest that looked like a police vest, but there was no word police on it, so I didn't want to give you my license if this was an illegal stop. Nor did his badge mention police, but rather criminal task force. He persisted in demanding to see my license and registration, so I asked him directly, "Are you a real police officer?" I asked him for his badge number, and he responded that he was a member of the undercover squad. He then asked for my license once again. According to him, he didn't have to give it to me. That was untrue, as I had sufficient knowledge regarding traffic stops. In addition, I noticed that his lights were all red and white instead of blue. I wasn't positive if this indicated that he wasn't a real police officer, but when combined with everything else, it seemed even more suspicious. When the man began urging me to get out of the car, I politely replied, "Until you can get a supervisor here, I'm not comfortable talking to you." He repeated asking me to get out of the car, raising the volume and becoming more demanding in his tone. "You don't seem like a real cop to me. If you were, it would be easy for you to get your supervisor here." He yelled at me to open the door after I pulled up the window a little, as he attempted to unlock the door while placing his hands on my window. I started the car and put it in drive, pushing his hands away. As soon as I began flooring it away from him, I heard him shout, "Stop." My pulse was pounding, and I prayed to God that I was right and would not end up in jail. However, as I drove away, exceeding the speed limit, I realized how terrible the situation was and how fortunate I was that this man was not a police officer. I noticed the vehicle with its lights on behind me. With the end of the day drawing near, I made the only decision in my head to contact 911. I told her over the phone that I thought someone was posing as a police officer and was chasing me. I pointed out that his automobile was unmarked and had no blue lights, that he refused to provide his badge number, and that his outfit indicated police. I told her that I was being pursued by this individual when she asked me for my whereabouts and further information about the circumstances. The woman informed me that the Fraser Winter Park Police Department was the closest police station to my vicinity. She asked me to go there and said she would send an officer to pick me up. Halfway to my destination, the person in the car was following me with his lights on. Then all of a sudden, as we came to an intersection, he shut off his lights and turned right. He drove off out of sight, and I knew then that my suspicion was correct. I drove to the police station even though I was stopped over by a man posing as a police officer, and there was a police officer waiting in his car in the parking lot. As soon as I pulled in, he appeared to know that I was the person he was going to meet. I gave him every minute detail of the meeting, including the identity of the individual, his automobile, and the location at which he made a right turn, and he recorded my contact details. Just in case I'd have to be called in to identify the individual, I suppose. In a matter of minutes, I was headed out. I'm relieved that I followed my gut and stayed in the car. From then, I could only speculate about how things may have turned out. My age is 29. In a little Michigan town, I live alone in my home. I'm tired of living in cities where I spent the majority of my life growing up. So on the weekends, I come here to escape. Although I enjoy living in a peaceful rural setting, my house and property are the type that are typically featured in horror films. A large house with distant neighbors, and not immediately next door. In my town, you don't hear too much about crime, but that's because there aren't many people living there. I come here to be alone and escape my anxieties from work and people in general during the week, even if I don't have many friends in the region. One Friday, not too long after I got home from my commute, there was a knock on the door, so I opened it right away to see a man carrying a clipboard. When he inquired if I was happy with my security system, I realized he was trying to sell me something. I joked that no one is breaking into this unattractive house and stated that I don't have one because I'm not really interested. He continued his pitch by listing all of the recent break-ins that had occurred in the neighborhood, which, to be honest, I was unaware of. I told him I lived alone, so I don't really need anything when he asked who I lived with. Despite my resistance, he persisted, asking for my phone number and promising to check in with me in a few weeks. On the spot, he offered to waive the installation price. That actually sounded pretty fantastic, so I thought, why not? I gave him my number, and after he thanked me, he went. I started preparing dinner in the kitchen after that, and I then went back to watching Yellowstone in the living room. I spent hours on the couch watching episode after episode because I was binging. Around 11 o'clock at night, there came a knock on the door. It's not proper to knock on someone's door at 11 o'clock at night, especially in this area. I wouldn't presume it was one of the neighbors because we're not very close. I continued to watch my show, ignoring the knocking. The knocks continued, but I still did not stand up. At 11 p.m., I wasn't answering the door. There was no way I could have stayed sitting. But then there were 3 knocks on the door. When I realized they weren't going to leave, I walked to the door to find out who was inside. This is precisely how a horror film would begin, and there was no response from the other side. I had no intention of opening the door to see who was there. I told you through the door that I wasn't interested in whatever you were trying to sell me. I don't hesitate to use the gun that I own. Although I don't really own a gun, I can scare people away with it rather easily. I returned to the couch thinking that had solved the problem because the knocking ceased. After then, my cell phone started ringing, and the caller ID read 911 Emergency Services. I had never in my life received a call from 911, and I didn't even know that they existed. I used to think that if the police called, it would say something like, "No call, ID," or something similar. A man on the other line inquired, "Is this George?" as soon as I picked up the phone, which I acknowledged. "This is the police department," he said. "Right now, there are policemen outside your home. We need to talk to you about a report of a crime that happened on your block." Nothing about this felt right. I requested that the police proceed to the window from the purported 911 operator. In order for me to recognize them before I opened the door, it didn't make sense when he stated he couldn't because they were already outside my house. Even if it were the actual cops, I would still hang up the phone and say I don't answer inquiries. I was under no legal duty to answer the door. Nevertheless, this was an obvious trap in every sense of the word. When they attempted to call me again using the same number, I turned off my phone and set it on Do Not Disturb. I really made the decision to phone 911 to find out if these calls were authentic in Illinois. The 911 operator informed me straight away that the calls were not real, even though there was someone at my door. "I lock all the doors," they said. "Seize a weapon-like object and remain inside my home until a police officer shows up." I heard someone trying to push the back door open and shimmy the knob as I was speaking with her on the phone. There were these extremely loud bangs on the back door, so it appears like they then attempted to kick or ram the door down. When I mentioned this to the operator, she informed me that the police would be there in under 10 minutes. But now when I needed them, I walked to the door and yelled, "Do you want to get blown up?" Someone on the other side yelled, "It's the cops. Open up." And then, there's another ram or kick into the door. Unlike the front door, the back door has a window next to it. I peered out the glass and saw 2 masked men trying to kick down my door. When I say mask, I mean that they had these eerie-looking bags covering their heads that appeared to have holes cut out for their mouths and eyes. They must have caught me staring out the window and using the phone. They must have realized I was speaking with real cops because they fled into the night. The real police knocked on the door about 5 minutes later. I allowed them inside, and one of the officers was really helpful, even searching my whole property. The 2 police cars in front of the house, with their lights on for 30 minutes, definitely put people off returning. One of the police cars remained in front of my house for hours after the officers left, I noted. I'm done opening the door to people at this time in the evening, since I'm sure they left. Unannounced though, because I have a 99% confidence that the man professing to offer security systems was simply inspecting Target's best home, while he and his squad were pretending to be 911 callers in order to coerce individuals into opening their doors late at night. My house was the only one on the street targeted for this, so I suppose I was the first place they tried, and I felt like an easy target. I went to my nearest neighbors to check if the person had knocked on their doors too, but they said no.